Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dominique Hoffman, and I will be reporting on the news that the United States military operation has been launched in Iran. Now, this is a highly anticipated response from the United States, decades in the making. Since the Iranian Revolution in the late 1970s, the Iranian people have called upon the United States to respond and help them address the regime. With the Iranian regime, we have seen diplomacy fail time and time again. And as President Trump outlines in his speech, diplomacy fails when they want to practice evil. The Western mind cannot comprehend the worldview of these Islamist extremists. They're fighting not just a conventional war. They are fighting a cosmic war. It becomes really difficult to negotiate with actors who view this war as a war here and in the next life. They don't fear death in the same way that Western actors might fear death and war. They welcome it. Again, it is part of ushering in the end times. There is an eschatological objective here. And because of that, the regime has discouraged negotiations, including Obama-era negotiations. It's interesting, isn't it? Individuals like Tucker Carlson love to preach about the money we send to Israel and how those taxpayer dollars would much better serve the American people here at home. And he points to that as an example of the strong Zionist lobby in the United States government. Yet I haven't heard him object to foreign aid going to Egypt, which is set up in a very similar way to the aid that goes to Israel. And I've also never heard Tucker Carlson object to the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars the United States sent to Iran as part of Obama-era negotiations and nuclear non-proliferation under the JCPOA. It's funny, isn't it, that the woke right only objects to funds and aid and loans going to Israel, the Jews, not to Iran under the JCPOA. The woke right has enacted a concerted effort to downplay the threat of Iran. They have tried to simplify this as Israel's war to eliminate Iran. But you have to step back and ask, why would Israel want the Iranian regime eliminated? Well, the Iranian regime undermines Israel's state sovereignty. For decades, Iran has used their proxies, specifically Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, to enact attrition and terror upon Israel. Now, we saw things escalate back in 2024. The status quo of Iran engaging with Israel through their proxies was broken when Iran directly attacked Israel. I actually happened to be there the day that happened. The region has been shaken and shaped by the aggression of Iran. Now, despite the way the woke right and those who support the regime try and spin it, Iran does not just threaten Israel. Israel is unique because it's the only Western nation in the region, and the regime hates Western norms. Israel also happens to be comprised of mostly Jewish Israelis. And in this Islamist worldview, as outlined in the Hadith, the end times will be ushered in when every Jew is killed. So there is an eschatological motivation behind Iran's hatred and signaling out of Israel. But Iran's proxies exist throughout the Middle East, in Lebanon, in the Palestinian territories, specifically Gaza, in Yemen, in Syria, and in Iraq. And because the Iranian regime is not equipped with equal capabilities to enact conventional wars with these countries, because they could not sustain a conventional war, they operate as terrorists tend to do, through cells, and they enact attrition on their enemies to destabilize the governing powers of those countries, specifically in war-torn countries like Syria and Iraq. Tucker Carlson loves to frame Israel as the reason the United States went to war and invaded Iraq in 2003. And let me be very clear, I am not a fan of Bush-era foreign policy. That doesn't mean that I agree with Tucker Carlson's assessment. And when I say Tucker Carlson, I mean the Dave Smiths, the Megyn Kellys, everyone who represents this isolationist thread on the center to conservative side of American politics and commentary. Israel warned the Bush administration in 2003 that Iraq was a manageable threat and that we should focus on the threat of Iran. And should the U.S. invade Iraq, it would create a power vacuum which Iran would fill, and they would destabilize Iraq and therefore create a larger threat than the Iraqi government posed at the time under Saddam Hussein. And that's exactly what happened. See, commentators who are against the U.S. military operation in Iran and who point to Iraq as an example of what's going to happen if we were to invade Iran, never discuss the fact that Iran and Iraq were at war with each other and that Iran, after the invasion of 2003, their proxy networks in Iraq to discourage the rebuilding of Iraq post 2003 invasion. Iran not only killed Iraqis and those who served under Saddam Hussein, but they killed our own troops. You see, the makeup of the Middle East is a lot more complex than how those who want to retell it and propagate it here in the US make it seem. It's not just Israel and Iran, and that's it. Take Yemen, for instance. Saudi Arabia and Iran have been fighting a proxy war in Yemen since the early 2000s. My point is, does Israel play a role in this regional dynamic? Absolutely. And two things can be true at once. Israel's interest can be in the Iranian regime's elimination, again, because it threatens their sovereignty. So why wouldn't they support that policy? But the United States' security can also be threatened by Iran, and therefore there are joint interests. And because Israel is our ally, and you tend to form alliances, especially long-standing ones, with countries that share your interest. So while the woke right wants to frame the interest of the United States and Israel as nefarious, it actually just makes sense. That's how alliances work. And sometimes intervention is needed. Take the French intervening in the colonies during the Revolutionary War. It was in France's strategic interest. We're going to look at President Trump's speech because he addresses all of this way more eloquently than I ever could. And he establishes that this is a just military operation, that this is a threat to the United States, not just Israel. But again, those mutual interests can exist. What I find to be extremely interesting is you have a lot of people who have zero understanding of the region's history, even in the last few decades, the conflicts that have occurred, or even understand how Israel sits within those conflicts. The Abraham Accords of President Trump's first administration is the perfect example of how the threat of Iran pushed Arab nations who refused for decades to normalize with Israel into normalization, both economically and from a security standpoint, because of the threat of Iran. And while Saudi Arabia never officially joined the Abraham Accords, that is what interested them about the security pact that formed across the Middle East. And we can even look to the 2024 Iranian missile launch against Israel. Jordan and many of the other Arab neighbors helped Israel in downing the missiles launched by Iran. While it goes against the status quo norms to speak out against another Islamic country in the region, many Islamic countries in the Middle East understand the security threat of Iran and secretly support Israel's objective. And so this is President Trump's address. I'll probably pause it halfway through, or I might let it run all the way through. And I'll point out how tactful he is in the things that he states, because again, he addresses the just war aspect of this, the threat of Iran to America and America alone, and how diplomacy failed because, and the quote is incredible, they just wanted to practice evil, which perfectly sums up the worldview and the ideology motivating the Iranian regime.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days. In 1983, Iran's proxies carried out the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel. In 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. Many died. Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. The regime's proxies have continued to launch countless attacks against American forces stationed in the Middle East in recent years, as well as U.S. naval and commercial vessels and international shipping lanes. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. From Lebanon to Yemen and Syria to Iraq, The regime has armed, trained, and funded terrorist militias that have soaked the earth with blood and guts. And it was Iran's proxy, Hamas, that launched the monstrous October 7th attacks on Israel, slaughtering more than 1,000 innocent people, including 46 Americans, while taking 12 of our citizens hostage. It was brutal, something like the world has never seen before. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror and just recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. It is.
And that's so interesting because you'll hear people on the woke left and the woke right talk about the plight of Palestinians, yet their sympathies for the Muslim world don't extend to Iran and Iranian protesters. I believe over 30,000 protesters in recent weeks in the last month have been slaughtered by their own government. Quite literally, the regime has opened fire into groups of people protesting, executing them, raining bullets down indiscriminately, hitting people in the face, all over their bodies. The death toll was horrific. And because of the internet blockade, we don't even understand the full scope or the numbers because they've suppressed information, and not just information that the world understands and can know, but the sharing of information and organization for those protests internally in Iran. Something that President Trump really tactfully does in the first part of this interview. Again, he states the objective. It's to protect the United States. This is a combat operation. Notice that he's not saying we are at war with Iran. He outlines how our bases in the Middle East, as well as our Western allies in Europe, are threatened by Iran. He goes on to talk about their nuclear program, but specifically their hypersonic ballistic missiles, which can reach Europe and also the American homeland, which poses a threat to our security interests. Again, nothing to do with Israel. And I encourage all of those who are objecting to this operation to ask the question, why would Iran need long-range hypersonic ballistic missiles? They don't need that to reach Israel. They need that to reach the United States and cross an entire ocean, which historically has acted as a buffer and separated us. He then goes into the death to America aspect of this. What President Trump is doing is he's painting a civilizational conflict. This is an ideologically motivated regime. And then he goes into all the examples of how that ideology has targeted United States personnel and our security interests. He talks about the embassy takeover. It was a 444-day takeover of 52 of our embassy personnel in Iran, and I believe 8 military personnel were killed in an attempt to rescue those hostages. The 1983 Marine barrack bombing in Beirut killed over 200 of our Marines. He also talked about the Red Sea. We've had military personnel within the last few years killed trying to address the reign of terror of the Houthis within the Red Sea. They have completely altered and enacted a war of attrition on global supply chains and all the necessary shipping that runs through the Red Sea. And then he talks about U.S. citizens in Israel on October 7th, 46 killed, 12 taken hostage. Those are all acts of aggression and even war. Yet the woke right doesn't want to talk about that. Again, they boil it down to Israel and they very conveniently ignore these examples. And then President Trump talks about all of the proxy networks across the region.
Has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again. They can never have a nuclear weapon. That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil.
That line is so good. They just wanted to practice evil. And again, it's because the Ayatollahs, the regime, they operate with this death cult mindset. They're fighting a cosmic war. So they're not interested in diplomatic negotiations, especially with a Western actor. The norms of engagement which they are operating and which form their calculus and their war strategy is completely different from the United States. And that's why when people are like, well, just talk to them, just negotiate. They're building a nuclear weapon, but they're not going to ever use it. Like, why does it matter? Why do we have to go to war? You don't ask a bully repeatedly to just be nice. The bully doesn't care, especially when it is an Islamist organization which welcomes death and cheers death as honor and as an ushering in eschatological end-time glory in taking over the Christian world and the Jews. It's very difficult to negotiate with terror, and it typically fails. Historically, it fails. Again, the international norms of engagement is defined by Western norms, which the regime fundamentally rejects. Therefore, negotiations will never go anywhere. And as President Trump is outlining, with the many examples of aggression towards the United States, their rhetoric, death to America, he's outlining their ideological motivations with historic evidence that they are willing to act on it. He then talks about their capabilities. They can never have a nuclear weapon. Iran acts through terror proxies networks because their capabilities cannot conventionally rival Israel, the United States, most assuredly, but also just other Arab countries in the region. And so they act like a terror organization does, just as a head of state, through small cell networks. And terror and attrition on your enemy is strategic because it's really difficult to counter when it's done through cell networks and when the objective is to destabilize regional powers, because they have been successful in doing that. And that's where the IDF's policy of the octopus doctrine comes into play. Why are we going to continue to fight these proxy wars when the head of the octopus remains in power? Because you can kill small cells, but a new cell is just going to emerge. It creates small power vacuums. So the new policy of Israel and of the United States, which is strategically sound, and to be honest with you, I don't know why it's taken decades to reach this point, should have been to eliminate the head of the terror network itself, which is the Iranian regime. Because if not, we're spending millions and millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to fight these proxy wars when we could just eliminate the regime, which actually goes to serve the interest of the woke rights agenda, which is to not fund wars abroad. So if the objective is to establish international peace, to not fund foreign wars, then it's actually strategically in that policy's interest to eliminate the Iranian regime, because the wars we have been fighting in the Middle East are at the behest of Iran. And the irony of all of that is that the woke right says it's at the behest and the interest of Israel. Well, Israel's proxy networks aren't the ones destabilizing the Middle East.
But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world and attack our forces, and no longer use their IEDs or roadside bombs, as they are sometimes called, to so gravely wound and kill thousands and thousands of people, including many Americans. And we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. It's a very simple message. They will never have a nuclear weapon. This regime will soon learn that no one should challenge the strength and might of the United States Armed Forces.
And that is what strong deterrence looks like. Because here's the thing, the United States can have the strongest military in the world. But if we capitulate and we prop up these regimes, whether it be Iran or Russia, and we negotiate with them as if they are a threat to the United States, and we allow them significant leeway, and we continue to threaten and never follow through when they are simply paper tigers benefiting from that appeasement, then the U.S. might and military fundamentally don't matter within the war calculus of our anti-Western adversaries abroad. Deterrence is not just having the capabilities, but the will to use those capabilities should all diplomatic channels fail. And that's exactly what President Trump outlined. That is what America first means. America first means that there's American hegemony in the world, and anti-Western actors don't get to dictate the norms of international engagement. The reason America is so great is because our government, our military, our economy, our hard power, and our soft power influence dominates the world's norms of engagement. That means that the world orbits and operates around the United States. Should we retreat from the global stage, it's not that no one just fills that role and we all just get along for funsies. Russia and China, who have stated objectives to be the global hegemonic power with an imperialist framework and worldview, will fill that role. And I don't know about you, in an anarchical international system, anarchy meaning that there is no universal governing power for how states interact, meaning that the strongest nation in the world at a given time is the hegemonic power and they dictate the norms of engagement. There's always going to be a global superpower. And here in the West, on the woke left and the woke right, we are told that we should apologize for that evil as Americans. What they fail to tell you is that an alternative where the US retreats either voluntarily or because another nation rivals or obtains capabilities greater than our own, the United States will no longer dictate norms of engagement, but the strongest nation will, that being China or Russia. And I don't know about you, but I would much prefer to live in a world dictated, even with all of our flaws, by the democratic, pluralistic, capitalistic ideals and norms that govern the United States than the authoritarianism of China or Russia.
I built and rebuilt our military in my first administration, and there is no military on earth even close to its power, strength, or sophistication.
And this is also true. The woke right, Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson, might I add, neither of whom are foreign policy experts, love to fearmonger that we're about to enter World War III. And in order for that to happen, you would have to have Russia and China run to defend Iran, except for the fact that we've learned over the last 5 years or so that both China and Russia are also paper tigers, artificially being propped up by global perception of their capabilities. Russia has been unable to win a war of election and aggression that they enacted on Ukraine for over 3 years. Their capabilities are that of Soviet-era military technology. In fact, they've had to rely on Iran to help equip them fight Ukraine. In a post-COVID world, China's not faring too great either. And while they might have a navy that rivals the United States, there is a lot of internal considerations that would restrain China from rushing into a global war. Our United States military and our capabilities, also in great thanks to the strong technological and capability sharing between the United States and Israel, far outpaces our anti-Western rivals.
My administration has taken every possible step to minimize the risk to U.S. personnel in the region. Even so, and I do not make this statement lightly, the Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war, but we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission. We pray for every service member as they selflessly risk their lives to ensure that Americans and our children will never be threatened by a nuclear-armed Iran. We ask God to protect all of our heroes in harm's way, and we trust that with his help, the men and women of the armed forces will prevail. We have the greatest in the world, and they will prevail. To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or in the alternative, face certain death. So lay down your arms. You will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass. May God bless the brave men and women of America's armed forces. May God bless the United States of America. May God bless you all. Thank you.
I think that is maybe one of President Trump's strongest speeches that I've ever seen. Again, because he so tactfully disarms the arguments of the woke right. Okay, so you have a lot of people not happy about this. The Democrats, of course, that was to be anticipated, despite the fact that their glorified president, Obama, completely failed to curb Iranian nuclear objectives and just dumped billions of dollars into the regime, which used it against us and our ally Israel on October 7th. And then also under the Biden administration, because Biden unfroze, I believe, around $20 billion worth of assets in the summer of 2023, right before October 7th, so directly funded that war and conflict. So despite the fact that their last two presidents have fueled and empowered the aggression of the Iranian regime, they're going to be anti-Trump's response to that aggression and economic empowerment, thanks to their guys. It's so incredible. Okay, so now you have a bunch of people saying that the Iranian strikes were not done with the approval of Congress. Now, Congress can enact and vote for an act of war, but Article 2 allows for the president to also, as the head, the commander-in-chief of our military, to respond to imminent threats with military action. And note that this was a military operation, not the U.S. is at war. A declaration of war has not been made. So you have a bunch of people in Congress, left and now this woke right. I believe is this Massey? Democrats and a few Republicans say they'll force a vote to limit Trump in Iran. Trump's congressional critics denounce Iranian strikes.
The president making it clear in his video statement today that this is a moment for the Iranian people to change their government. And I think that's part of what's so striking about this military operation. They are launching this military operation with the hopes that there will be regime change at the hands of the Iranian people. Will there need to be U.S. boots on the ground? Is that something that he's going to rule out? Those are among the questions that lawmakers have. I can tell you that I have been talking to administration officials throughout the course of this week as the president has weighed this very heavy decision. It's worth noting and reminding everyone he campaigned on a promise to get the U.S. out of foreign wars. And so this is a decision that he undoubtedly understands the gravity of. He said you can never rule out the possibility that this could be a prolonged military engagement, despite the fact that the vice president tried to downplay those concerns. To the points that Julie were making, Democrats stepping up their calls for congressional oversight. Congressman Ro Khanna joining the chorus. He has authored bipartisan legislation which would require President Trump to seek congressional approval, calling on Congress to come back on Monday to vote on whether there can be a prolonged and sustained military operation in Iran. So I think that that's where the conversation is headed now here in Washington. What, if any, accountability? What, if any, oversight does there need to be of this military action and of any future military action moving forward? We are hearing from the president's allies, Senator Lindsey Graham, who is calling this a well-planned operation, and in a phone call that I had with him saying that he is prepared for this to last for days, if not weeks. So it does give you a sense of the size and the scope of it. I did just hear from Caroline Levitt, who said those taped remarks by the president right now are all that we will hear from President Trump for the time being.
The fact that this NBC reporter is more gracious about the very hard and complex decision to decide to enact this operation in Iran is mind-blowing when we look at Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and everyone else on the woke right, which is within the GOP base and camp. So just to note, the ideological fracturing on the right is being highlighted by this decision to operate within Iran. Now, I want to highlight the U.S. Constitution, Section 1, Article 8, gives Congress the ability to vote and declare war. But Article 2 acknowledges the president as the commander-in-chief, and so he can enact military operations as well. A formal declaration of war has only been done 11 times in U.S. history, and the last time was in World War II. So just think about all of the military conflicts we have been involved in throughout proxy wars, in the Cold War, and then under the Bush administration. Those were not official declarations of war. I don't think Congress really has any like legal or constitutional grounds to stand on, but of course there's going to be a holdup with that, I am sure. I don't think that this operation is going to turn into full-scale regional war. I think, as I've said in other episodes, many of the Arab countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, view Iran as an existential threat themselves. And so I believe they're just going to let the United States go in and do what they need to do, and then perhaps even back the United States should it escalate. And we're now seeing Iran rain missiles down again. This is the tactic and strategy of a highly weakened regime. They cannot respond to the U.S., so they are now enacting attrition across the region. They operate in a terror framework and mindset. Again, the weaker actor that is ideologically motivated is always going to exhort to attrition and terror. That is their main tactic. Now, just to visually drive the point home that Iran is a state sponsor of proxy warfare across the region, we have all these proxy wars. So we have Iraq, which Iran was engaged in conventional war with Iraq. We have Lebanon, so we have Hezbollah. We have the Palestinian territories. We have Syria and Yemen being a proxy war with Saudi Arabia. And then there's been subversive activities in Afghanistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. And then this is a list of all their proxy networks. Again, this goes far beyond Israel. To just drive that point home, anyone telling you that this has to do with the Zionists in Israel are ignoring decades of Middle East history, again, with Israel completely out of the picture, and the aggression of Iran towards its Arab neighbors. Okay, so we are already seeing reports that Khamenei might have been killed in some of these targeted strikes against regime compounds. Multiple high-ranking Islamic commanders have been killed. You have the Middle East Eye saying that he is alive. Whenever you want to know what the anti-Western narrative is, check out the Middle East Eye and Al Jazeera, and you'll completely understand the framework of which the Islamic and Qatari world is working from. And you'll notice that the talking points of Al Jazeera are the ones being peddled by Tucker Carlson, now Megyn Kelly, Dave Smith. Again, start to question why people who claim to so passionately represent American interests are using the talking points of the Iranian regime and of Al Jazeera, which is essentially the media arm of Qatar. So we don't know if he's dead or alive. I'm sure he will be dead, and he can burn forever in the fiery pits of hell. I've always wondered what happens when you enact Islamic terror your whole life, believing that you're going to be a martyr and inherit a bunch of virgins in heaven. Like the disappointment of being tortured for eternity in the fiery lakes of hell. The irony of that is incredible. Okay, now I also want to address what President Trump says at the end of his speech, which is that the Iranian people, now is your time to take over your government. That was a specific rebuttal to the woke rights fear-mongering that the United States wants to go into a war for regime change. Again, hearkening back to the failed 2003 invasion of Iraq, again, largely failed because the war strategy of the U.S. was extremely weak. It didn't understand or comprehend the norms of engagement with an Islamic country that doesn't operate from a democratic Western worldview, but also because Iran played a huge role in destabilizing any rebuilding efforts on the part of the Iraqi government. So this Reuters report said, exclusive, prior to Iran attack, CIA assessed Khamenei would be replaced by a hardline IRGC elements if killed, sources said. So, of course, what we're going to have to assess in the coming days and weeks is the power vacuum that is created. Yes, the Iranian government is going to have people in place to take over should their heads be eliminated. Then there's also the concern of President Trump saying, take over your government, meaning you are empowered to reconstruct your government once the regime is eliminated. And the threat of the regime is the unifying force for counter movements within Iran. Once the regime is eliminated, you're going to have vying factions and vying political ideologies seeking to instate the government they wish to enact in Iran. So I'm praying that there's consistent unity in Iran. You have people who are monarchists who want to see the monarchy reinstated. You have people who are Republicans. You have people who favor the regime or favor some sort of a theocratic regime. And that's going to be the difficult part. And I'm sure the United States is going to play a strategic role in endorsing a coalition in Trump government as they did in Venezuela. If not, a dangerous power vacuum will ensue. I don't think the U.S. is going to be completely hands off, but the rhetoric of President Trump saying that this is your moment is extremely strategic. So just to note, there's always a threat of a power vacuum in any sort of regime change. I believe the U.S. will handle that delicately, and they are anticipating that. For all those who are fear-mongering, again, that this is just for the U.S. interest to go in, neo-colonial imperialism, and basically take over a foreign sovereign nation. That's not what's happening. So now to visit the people who are outspokenly anti-intervention within Iran, of course, we have our favorite conservative talking head, Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker interviewed the president of Iran about a year ago when all this was being anticipated. And then yesterday, the day before the military operation, him and Megyn Kelly did a whole segment on how Bibi Netanyahu is the one bringing us into war with Iran. So they got their talking points from Qatar, no doubt. So Milk Bar TV posted this. President of Iran, when interviewed by Tucker Carlson last year, said death to America isn't about death to Americans or their officials. Iran's supreme leader. Death to America means death to its rulers. It means death to Trump. Okay, let's watch this because this is the lie that Tucker is selling you.
But Americans are afraid of Iran. They see video of Iranians saying death to America.
When they say death to the United States, it doesn't mean death to, they don't mean death to the people of the United States or even to the officials of the United States.
برای حضرات بزرگان آمریکایی روشن کنم. مرگ بر آمریکا یعنی مرگ بر ترامپ و جان بولتون و پومپئو. مرگ بر این.
It's Khomeini saying, when I say death to America, I mean death to the officials, Mike Pompeo, President Trump, John Bolton. So specifically saying exactly what we think he means. And yet we have Tucker Carlson running interference with pre-prepped talking points when he interviewed the president of Iran.
And once again, I would like to tell you and remind you that this is not death to the American people or to the officials.
Death to America, the rulers of America. Who would have thought death to America actually means exactly what they're saying? So you have an entire media campaign happening to discourage support for our U.S. military, funded by Qatar, propagated by Tucker Carlson, all to say that when Iran says death to America, they don't actually mean it, and it's actually the Zionists who are bringing us into war. It has nothing to do with America. It has nothing to do with us. The amount of mental gymnastics and cognitive dissonance you have to engage in for that argument to make sense is astounding, and yet that is a rising popular narrative within the right. Again, I would put it to around 45% of those who identify as members of the GOP are bandwagoning on this rhetoric, ideology, and therefore policy prescription of isolationism. Tommy Robinson posted this to all the Westerners siding with the Islamic regime, which again is so crazy. To look at the norms of the Islamic world, how they treat women, how they brutally rape and maim Western women that they don't agree with on October 7th. It has nothing to do with them being Jewish. They mutated women's breasts. They sodomized them. They mutated and cut off their private areas. They cut off men's private areas. They sodomized men. They recorded it. The fact that we look at these actors and somehow a significant portion of those on the right can side with the Islamic regime blows my mind. And to me, tells me that we have multiple generations of men and women who have lived completely privileged lives, who never travel. I think the best use of U.S. government money would be to send every single American high schooler to an authoritarian regime around the world and see how the other significant portion of the world lives. The Groypers, all of these young men who, by the way, aren't in our U.S. military, are not really men. They're young boys who cosplay military action in video games, are the ones out here talking about the Zionists leading us into war. How about you get your ass off of your computer gaming chair and you go sign up for the U.S. military, and then you can have an opinion about what war is. But when your entire idea of war is framed by tanks or whatever the hell you play until 3 a.m. on your computer, and then you live a pretty mediocre life because you're addicted to video games and pornography and nicotine and alcohol, maybe you shouldn't be the one dictating where the policy conversation goes. It's just a crazy thought. So this is what the Islamic regime says and thinks and talks about in government forums. This is their assembly. This is their faux assembly because there's no real government institution. It's a dictatorship. So just like North Korea and Cuba and Venezuela cosplay democratic institutions, this is their assembly. That's what they say, believe. And as Tony Robinson said, and this is what Trump set up in his speech, if they got nukes, they'd kill you without thinking twice. And I don't know, again, if it's because we have a whole generation of people who've never experienced hardship or don't understand human nature or history. Again, maybe it's the fault of our education system. Wars suck. Having an enemy who seeks to destroy your existence has been the push-pull of human existence and civilization throughout all of history. We just benefit from the experiment of Western norms and democracy and a strong U.S. military, so we've never had to experience that threat in actuality. And I thought President Trump nailed it on the head. He said our troops are going into this operation. It is a just cause. And there could unfortunately be casualties. And he said, I don't say this lightly. And yes, of course, we pray for our troops. But people like Dave Smith talk about war, even the Israel-Hamas-Gaza war, and they talk about casualties, like how incredibly evil is Israel that there are casualties in Gaza. War is evil. And again, they only care about the war between Israel and its Arab neighbors. They don't care about what's happening in Nigeria with Boko Haram and the Christian genocide that's happening there. They don't care about what's happening in Yemen or in Syria or in any other Middle Eastern countries, let alone other conflicts around the world, including in Southeast Asia. They don't care about that. They don't actually care about casualties or human loss. It's just when it leans in and propagates their anti-Israel narrative. But again, war sucks. When has war ever been easy? And also, we have a U.S. military. I have many of my best friends have married amazing men who serve in our armed forces. And I'm so grateful to them. And I see the sacrifice that my best friends make to even be married to them. It is a very difficult life to be in our U.S. military. It's a sacrifice. It's a personal sacrifice. But when you join the military and the army, you understand that you were signing up to defend your country. And there's also wonderful honor and pride in that. We should weigh every escalation to conflict heavily because these are precious human lives. But there is also honor in going to war to defend your country and your way of living and the norms that benefit your loved ones and family members back home. These men and women sign up for our military understanding that they could lay down their lives to protect their homeland. And that is a beautiful sacrifice, which we should praise. But discouraging war at all costs and demonizing the military for going into conflict zones, which are necessary to address, does the exact opposite of that. And again, the irony that all of the groypers and the young conservative men who support this isolationist, anti-Zionist agenda are not true men signed up in our military to fight on behalf of their country. They are weak men who opt for the comfortability of their gaming chair to then play war games because biologically they are still wired to defend and be men, except they cosplay that, which then leads to a life of shame and grievances and mediocrity. And then they want to hate the Jews because of that and our government, and they sit and they listen to Nick Fuentes rant for 4 hours instead of going out and being a man or serving for their country. So those who are so Tucker, Nick Fuentes, anti-war, anti-Israel, I'm going to do a whole video on that. It greatly infuriates me. I already made that point, but the irony of it, like we have true servicemen fighting, and then we have these groypers who game all night playing tanks and war games, cosplaying being a man, is not lost on me. I want to look at this woman's video responding to the war because she's a Candy fan. She peddles like the Epstein ultra conspiracies. Again, the Epstein files, yes, they're true. But she's gone after Erica Kirk. She just regurgitates everything that Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes says. So I'm going to watch what she says because, again, this is the common narrative that is now prevalent on the American right. And I want to address it because she completely misrepresents what President Trump said. And she's bandwagoning on this dangerous train of thought. And she's simply just bandwagoning very dangerous and ill-informed ideas. We have all these armchair experts who, if we were to take the names of countries off a map, could probably not even point to where Iran is. I've talked about this before. With the rise of social media and the anarchy of thought that is now online, where we think we need to all be experts on absolutely everything, we all are owed information. In the case of Charlie Kirk's assassination, we are all owed the information that the FBI has, which will be presented in the case against Tyler Robinson. We are all owed to know what that information is. There should never be anything that's classified. We as the American people are entitled to know everything. Groupthink is extremely dangerous, especially when you have a populace which is chronically unable to critically think and is uneducated and ill-informed. And we see the rise of even comedians like Seth Dillon and Dave Smith becoming armchair experts about conflicts for parts of the world that they've never even been to. Again, deplore Dave Smith, Tim Dillon, to explain to me even the past few regimes which have governed the Middle East and the proxy wars that have happened between Iran and other Arab nations. Forget Israel. If you can't point Iran out on a map and you can't tell me who the supreme leader is and you can't tell me what year the revolution was, I don't want to hear your take on what's happening in Iran. You're just ill-informed. Therefore, anything you have to say is garbage, including this woman. So let's take a look.
Flirting our country is in a war. I was gonna come on here, do my celeb gossip like I always do, but I felt really weird not addressing this because what the heck? The president that bragged about ending a bunch of non-existent wars literally started a new war while we were all asleep. But you know what really pissed me off, guys? Hearing this guy basically say, like, yeah, we're gonna sacrifice American lives, American soldiers for Israel. No biggie. Like, I'm sorry. When I hear him speak, sometimes I'm like, what country am I in? It's America, right? You're the president of America, right? But I feel like this is like the United States of Israel. But earlier, Trump had said, we have launched a large-scale operation in Iran. Our goal is to eliminate threats and protect the American people. Oh, protect the American people. But now you literally just said, like, oh, we're probably going to have some casualties, our American soldiers, but, we got to do what we got to do. Like, I'm sorry, how are you protecting us? Just say what it is that you are doing. You are doing this for Israel.
President Trump, if she watched the speech, never once did he say we're doing this for Israel. He gave about 4 or 5 examples of how Iran is a threat to us from past examples of aggression towards our U.S. military or American civilians. In every case, not one of those had to do with Israel. I've walked through how Iran has destabilized the region and how their nuclear proliferation and their missile arsenal, their hypersonic ballistic missile arsenal, is aimed towards America. They don't need that to target Israel. They need that to reach the homeland, which again, as I've already said, the ocean used to protect us. We were geographically isolated. Technology now closes that gap. And the moment to address an existential threat is probably not the day that Iran has ballistic missile capabilities that can reach American soil. That's then when a full-scale war happens and this America first, America only faction hates war so much. Well, yeah, this is how deterrence works. This is how you deter large-scale war and World War III. But these people are so freaking stupid and simple-minded that calculus is too much for their brain to handle. Like, they don't have the mental capacity. Even this idiot framing it like, when I woke up, Trump went to war while we were asleep. Well, babes, there's something called international time zones. And so when you were asleep, it was actually morning in Iran, and that's when the operation started. It had nothing to do with trying to deceive you. In fact, President Trump blasted out an address to the nation. So this wasn't like, in the cover of night to deceive the American people, to distract us. But that is how Tucker and all these individuals are choosing to frame it. Then we have to start asking the questions, why do no-name celebrity gossip, Instagram, content creators have all the same talking points? And it's because they're taking them from people like Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, Megyn Kelly, Dave Smith, Tim Dillon, all of whom, by the way, are not Middle East foreign policy experts. A day ago, and I'm not going to even watch this video, I might do a separate reaction to it. It's slightly old news, but I want to point out how highly coordinated the Qatari media operation is operating within the conservative right. This is Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson talking about how Bibi Netanyahu has been warning about Iran's nuclear program for 2 decades, and therefore us going into Iran is completely at the behest of Israel and a part of the Zionist operation. This YouTube segment was released the day we went into Iran. You cannot tell me that the interview with Mike Huckabee and then this segment reflecting on it and then propagating anti-Israel propaganda was not all highly informed as far as the timeline. Remember, Tucker Carlson also went to the White House to meet with Trump after the Huckabee interview and strategically released, prepping the woke right audience to condemn the inevitable military operation in Iran. The timing is so beautifully perfect. I believe it points to a more highly coordinated Qatari military operation happening within conservative media. And I'll probably respond to this. I'm going to do a whole video about misinformation when it comes to Iran and then unpack the Iranian proxy wars in depth because this video is already getting a little bit long. But just note how highly coordinated this segment was in anticipation of a military operation. I want to show you some of the most extreme examples of how the woke right is responding to this military operation. The woke right is reciting Islamic prayers for Allah to protect Ayatollah Khamenei. This is Milo. This is that gay guy who talked so theatrically like this on Tucker Carlson's channel and talked about how he's not gay anymore, but Charlie Cook was gay. He's that one. He tweeted, "Oh God, protect Ayatollah Khomeini. Oh God, we place you before them and we seek refuge in you from their evil." Their evil is the United States. You are praying to protect the supreme leader of Iran who has oppressed his own people and slaughtered countless people across the Middle East. And this points to the unholy alliance between people who call themselves Christians and the Islamic world. Really? Well, you're not praying to my God, the Christian God. Like the fact that you would pray a prayer of protection over a belligerently brutal anti-Christian dictator is like beyond insanity. Like the fact that this is also not just fringe X tweets, like this man yields a ton of influence and he's part of the woke right manosphere apparatus. And then last, I want to talk about how the mainstream media is already propagating a lot of information when it comes to the casualties that are already coming out of the first day of this military operation. So ABC News reported the toll from a strike on a girls' elementary school in Menab, Iran, was risen to 57 students dead and 60 others injured, according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency, which cited the local governor. Okay, so this is exactly what they did in the Gaza war. And the fact that these are Western news outlets reporting statistics from the Iranian regime, that is like covering World War II and then citing the statistics of the Nazis as your authoritative and representative source. In addition to that, this is exactly like the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza, where it was a misfire of a Hamas rocket that killed people in the hospital, not of an Israeli missile attack, but it was reported as an Israeli strike on a hospital, which is a violation of international norms of engagement for warfare. So Clay Travis tweeted, "It was an Iranian misfired missile, you dumb CUNTs." How does American media consistently share propaganda from Hamas, Iran, places where there is zero free press at all? It is malpractice, 100%. And the Iranian regime, which has already slaughtered 30,000 plus of their own people, will not hesitate to bomb entire schools and hospitals and airports and civilian centers to enact attrition upon their own people who are calling for their regime to step down, and also to frame the American operation as targeting civilians. There will be more reports like this coming out in the coming days and weeks, I promise you. And the fact that we have a Western media apparatus that reports, again, as Clay aptly points out, these statistics from a government that suppresses knowledge and information and has no free press or media is mind-blowing. And I promise you, Tucker Carlson will also report these false reports as factual to frame America as the moral villain in escalating a conflict of aggression and imperialism on behalf of the evil, evil Zionist Jews. We are now at a point where we have an information war, also funded by Qatar, by the way, on the left, and a significant portion of American conservative commentators peddling that same propaganda. Is America sane anymore? The fact that we operate in a world where there is more information at our fingertips than ever before, yet we repeat groupthink and propaganda, tells me that the proliferation of knowledge or even declassifying information like was called upon with Epstein files isn't the solution to educating the masses. And something I've become more and more aware of is the American right is about as dumb as the American left when it comes to woke propaganda and repeating talking points that are ahistorical, not factual, and appeal to your emotions instead of logic and facts. All right. All that to say, thank you, President Trump. Finally. I have a lot of Persian friends, Iranians, who have been waiting for this day. And all I can say is I pray Cuba is next. And I think we are gearing up for that after Iran is addressed. Free Iran, give the Iranian people back their voice and ability to self-govern. And if that offends you, then you're the problem. And that's probably the most anti-liberal, pluralistic Christian stance you could ever take. And with that, I will see you in the next episode.